Word of God today, and let's look at Luke chapter 17, from verse 11 through 19. So we'll look at Luke chapter 17, from verse 11 through 19. Luke chapter 17, verse 11 through 19, it says, "Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, 'Jesus, Master, have pity on us.' When he saw them, he said, 'Go show yourselves to the priests.' As they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, 'Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was not one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?' And he said to him, 'Rise and go. Your faith has made you well.'" And the title of today's message in verse 17, it says, "Where are the other 9? Where are they? So we see a message recorded, a miracle recorded in the book of Luke. And whenever we look at these type of miracles, we should remember they have a deeper meaning beyond just simply the event, but they can apply to our life. It's not just a miracle long ago, but I am the one also being healed of my sickness. And so it's important to look at this. And another reason, another framing I want for today's message is understanding that we are actually starting the 40-day path towards Easter. So Lent was on Wednesday, began on Wednesday. So Lent begins on Ash Wednesday, and it is 40 days before Easter, and Easter is in April this year. And so it signifies 40 days that we walk towards Easter. And what do we meditate on deeply during Lent, these 40-day walk towards Easter? Well, we meditate on the suffering of the Lord. We should meditate on his cross and meditate on his suffering. In fact, the upcoming retreat, that is what we're going to study very, very deeply, is the path of the cross. And so, in preparation for that, in preparation for Easter and understanding the path of the cross, what I wish to self-examine is, how are we towards the Lord? Right? How is our relationship towards the Lord? How do we look at the Lord? How are we going to meditate deeply on the cross? So, is it that we approach Jesus and approach the cross, right, and approach God in a warm way, or do we go in a cold way, right? This is what I want to ask ourselves. Do we go in a warm way with a warm heart, right, or do we go in a cold way? This is what we should consider, especially as we look at today's miracle that is happening to these people suffering from leprosy. So we're going to look at that one by one. First of all, what it says is that Jesus is traveling between the border of Samaria and Galilee. So he's traveling in this place. So this area of Samaria, typically the Jews tried not to go through this area, right? They would either go around or they would just go straight shot through, but quickly, avoiding everybody, right? And so they did not like Samaritans at all, Jews, right? Jews did not like Samaritans at all. They avoided them almost like a plague. And so what were Samaritans? So during that time, during a few hundred years before this, there was, of course, the exile, right? And during the exile, what happened was that some Jews mixed with the country that overtook them, right? So Babylonia and the Assyrians, right? And so these were basically Jews mixed with many, many other, because in that era, the Assyrians and Babylonians had many, many countries underneath them, and so they were mixed with those people. So essentially, impure, right? Impure Jews. This is what Samaritans were. And so Jews, when they looked at Samaritans, they saw them as a perversion to their faith, right? And that's how they viewed this. So, imagine this. Imagine you're a Samaritan, you're in this region, right? And, of course, your genealogy, and this was already a few hundred years ago, your genealogy is already mixed like this, and you're already living in this region, but then the people living in this region, right, consider you like that, like a perversion to your faith in that way. So, how would you feel? Well, you would feel isolated, right? You would feel isolated. I mean, that's your home. You don't want to leave your home. I mean, that's where you live. This is your home. This is where your family has been, but really feeling isolated in your own home. So, would you just leave, just because you felt that? Probably not. And so really, but still, just feeling isolated in that way. And so, that's how the Samaritans were. And also, I want to say, this is how the lepers were too. Right? This is how lepers feel. So what was leprosy? So I'm comparing the Samaritans and I'm comparing them to leprosy. So leprosy, what is this? It's a disease, and lepers also were people that were sort of like quarantined and isolated. This is something we definitely understand in the pandemic era. Being isolated and quarantined, right? But they really were. And so how was it? So it's like being in your own home, but being like often like this little place where other lepers are, right? And so Jesus, he is actually going to this place. He meets 10 lepers, 10 people with this very gruesome disease. So this disease, what it basically was a long-term bacterial infection, right? That's what it was. They didn't know that back then. Like we know that. We know that it's a long-term bacterial infection, but they didn't know that back then. So for them, it was just basically like it starts as like a white patch somewhere, right? Leprosy starts as a white patch somewhere, and then it gets bigger, and then it becomes numb, right? And then the white patch starts to spread, right, to various places. In particular, something that would happen to lepers, one thing that was very, signified, it was very clear you had leprosy, because, you could cover the white patch with your clothes, right? But not your face, right? Not your face. So something that really signified that you had leprosy was that, it would grow like large sort of like bumps, sponge-like, tumor-type bumps on your face. And so it was very obvious. And so, there's a lot of them on your face, right? Imagine that, right? Look it up yourself even, but that's what they look like. And so, this is no cure, obviously. Like, these days, of course, we have some cures for this. We know it's a bacteria, and so, we have medicines for this. But back then, of course, no cure, right? And so, people, it was very, very obvious if people had this disease. And so, really people avoided them, and then they wanted them outcast from their city, right? So if there was a city wall, there were a lot of big cities had the city walls around their cities, right? And so lepers had to be outside of the city walls. They were outcast in the cities. And so very often what would happen was lepers would, be living out basically in the wilderness. And, what would happen was, think about it, your skin, right, all over. If the leprosy got really bad, the skin was completely numb, right? All the skin was completely numb, but you're outside of the city walls, and so animals at nighttime would actually come on and chew on the skin, right, of the lepers, right? That's what they would do. And they couldn't even feel it. Right? They couldn't even feel it because their skin was numb like this. And so whether it be from that or whether it be from, just other types of problems that occur, you can imagine this complicates your body and your health in many, many different ways. And so lepers would either die from the infection itself over a long, long period of time, or they would die from some other type of thing, from some complications related to this. And so this is how lepers would die. And so for us, we have to think about this. What is leprosy? What kind of sickness is this for us? Well, when you come to find out, this sickness of leprosy is, of course, like all sicknesses, a sickness of our sin, right? It's a sickness for our sin. And so it's basically an unavoidable disease that we all have. So think about it. How is sin? So sin starts off small. Right? It starts off small. Usually inside of the heart, usually in a place that other people cannot see. Right? And so it could be a bit of pride, could be a bit of anger, could be a bit of jealousy or lust or greed or power, fame, these types of things, right? And so it comes in, right? Starting small, but it mixes, right? It mixes in like bad yeast in a dough, right? And what it is, it starts to transform me all over. And then eventually it does become a place where it does become something where, not only can other people see, but then even when I look at myself, I can't even recognize myself anymore, right? It's become so bad, and I'm numb to it too, right? I'm numb to this sin as well. So that's how sin is. A little bit of sin comes in, and then it becomes numb, right? You don't even know that you're sinning because you're so used to sinning. And so, really, this is the story that the Bible really teaches us about sin. Look from the fall from Adam and Eve. And so at the beginning, the serpent came to Adam and Eve and stoked inside of them a bit of pride. You will be like God. And so for them, they tried to inside of their heart, they still try to self-righteously justify eating the fruit, and so they eat it, right? And so this is their pride. And then, they look at it, and they touch it, and they eat it, they actually commit the sin. For us, we should be pure from sin, but it gets in, right? We are weak, and it comes in like that. It comes in our hearts, and it comes in all over us, and then it starts to spread over, and then we are numbed by it. And then what happens is that once sin becomes very obvious, like it was with Adam and Eve, and how was Adam and Eve? So once they actually committed the sin, and God knows about this sin, obviously, He knows their thoughts and He knows what they did, but still, what Adam and Eve try to do is they try to cover themselves and they try to hide. Right? That's what they do. They try to cover themselves and they try to hide like that. And so in other words, they isolate themselves. They isolate themselves from God in this way. And so, this is what sin does. This is why sin, the sickness of sin itself is leprosy. Right? The sickness of sin itself is leprosy. It casts God from our heart, and like leprosy, sin becomes incurable. Right? This incurable disease that spreads and spreads and spreads until my death in whatever way it is. And that's how sin is. We are born into this world, sin, we live in this sin, and then we just die separated from God in this way. And this is the sadness of us living in this world. But, when you think about it, should that be our life, right? Should that be our life? We just sort of, get born into this world, and then, we just sin, our whole life just stuck in sin, like leprosy spreading all over, and then, we just die. That's it. We have to think about this. Is life really so, diseased and hopeless and meaningless like that? That's what happens. And so, really, when you look at this world and many, many people isolated from God like this, actually come to think of it, you really come to realize, why is the world the way it is? We have so many problems inside of this world, so many issues. Everywhere there's problems all around the world. And when you really think about it, that's actually very, very obvious why the way the world is, right? Basically, the reason why the world is the way it is because it's just like one big giant leper colony. Is what it is, right? That's what lepers would do. They would be outcast from the city, right? But they would have their own little leper colony. And so the people who are lepers would get together, like this, and have their own little leper colony. And so, really, when you think about this, this is the way that the world is, that the earth has become one giant leper colony of disease and isolated people. We're a colony of people with sin and self-righteously justifying the sin. Actually more than the Samaritans or the lepers, right? Long ago, who were the real lepers, right? Who were the real lepers? The real lepers were the self-righteous Jews, the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law. It was these self-righteous ones, right? And so actually it is by the law that, they were self-righteously isolating each other, like using the law to isolate one another. Like we have relationships based on the law. I do something for you, you do something for me. It's very lawful, right? Sin and punishment, very legalistic in this way, right? And so, this is what is really isolating people in this way long ago. And so more than, at least the lepers knew, right, that they were sick, right? And so it was the ones who didn't even know that they were sick, the diseased, self-righteous ones, right? And so these, really intelligent, Pharisees, who in essence just lived their life very moralistically legalistic, right, in this way. They were the real lepers. And so, if we think about it back then we understand, why this whole world is a giant leper colony. There's people who know about their sin, or if it's even people don't know about their sin, but then they're just legalistic about their sin. They're just morally self-righteous, right, about their sin, and then treating other people like that, and isolating themselves from other people because, they look at others, they judge others, and condemn others for that sin, right? We do this, as we just look at sin, all the time like this. And so you see how this world becomes one giant leper colony, right? And this is why we are blind to our own sickness, and this is why we have such cold relationships with other people. I talked about that at the beginning of today's message, right? How we are with God. Well, we should think about how also we are with other people. Do we have, cold relationships with other people? Like, it feels like, that we were trying to get some warmth, but because we're so legalistic about our relationships, right, it's just ultimately cold, right? It's just ultimately cold in the end, right? And then, because of that, life feels isolated, right? Like we're trying to find like some warmth. It's like, when I was a Boy Scout, I was telling this the other day, we would go into the snow, and then I built like this big snow cave, and then we go into the snow cave, right? And so, like you're trying to get warm in any way possible, but you're just like shivering in this cold world, and that's how we are. That's how we are. We're trying to get like some little warmth how we are, but we're just living in a cold world. So feeling cold, right, in our relationships. Really, when I was young, actually there was, I was bullied a bit as a boy, because usually it was my name, Walker, right? So people would find ways, as little kids, to turn my first name into, some funny joke or something like that. And so I'd be bullied because of that. Also because of my clothes, right? My clothes weren't like the most fashionable or anything like that. And so, I was bullied in a way. And then, I remember after some years I kind of overcame that. But, I don't know why, when I was in junior high, I actually bullied a couple other people, that were isolated in this way. And so, someone, I remember especially one incident, this guy who was bullied, I sort of bullied him, other people were already bullying him, and then I pulled his chair from underneath him and sat, like this down, and I did this, everyone laughed at him in class, and I remember that now. I was like, how mean was I when I was a little kid like that? I was bullied, but then bullying other people like this, and you just realize, when you think about these kinds of things, that how sick we all are. We all have leprosy, and we all have sin, and it doesn't really make sense. Like, why do we do that? Like, why did I do that? I was bullied, and then I'm bullying other people. Like, it's like really ridiculous why you would do something like that, but I did that. Right? Even I did that when I was a kid like this, and it really doesn't make any sense why we are so, why we live in this cold way. Like, how we are with each other in our relationships, like just trying to get like a little bit of warmth, right? That's how we are, but, still very legalistic in some way, and then really just ultimately cold and isolated from one another. Right? We're cold. So, why is that? Why is it that we live in such like a leper colony in an isolated world like that? Well, it's because of the sickness, right? It's because of sin. It's because ultimately, more than like isolating with one another, like, like the solution maybe you might think, is just to be warm with one another. well, yeah, I mean, we should be warm with one another, but how can we ultimately be warm with one another? We are limited and we are weak. You know, the problem is more fundamental than that. The problem is more fundamental than how we are with each other, but the problem more is with our heart towards God. Right? That is the most fundamental problem, right? So even before my relationships with other people, like why I have such cold and legalistic and just very worldly, intellectual relationships with other people, right? Why it's ultimately like that is because we're isolated from God, right? In my heart, I'm isolated from God. And that is ultimately the reason, right? More than other people, that's because we're isolated from God. Right? And so, really, these lepers, these Samaritans and these lepers were isolated. But what did Jesus do? So let's look in verse 13 and 14. So Luke chapter 17, verse 13 and 14, it says, and called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. When he saw them, he said, go show yourselves to the priest. And they went, and they were cleansed. Right? So they were healed. So although many other people were cold to the lepers, right? We see that Jesus was very warm to the lepers. He showed them mercy, and they had the desire to be healed, and so Jesus gave them healing. And so one thing it says here, what Jesus says here in red letters, he says, go show yourself to the priest. And so what does this mean? And so there were cases actually long ago that leprosy was actually healed, right? So it's not that, if you got leprosy and then, immediately you get one little thing and that was it. In actuality, there were cases that leprosy was healed. And so what would happen is that the lepers just somehow were healed, who knows, it's probably something related to their body, killing off the bacteria or something happened, right? And that they were healed, right? But anyways, back then, people were still a little bit wary, like, oh, are they healed or not healed? And so it was actually priests, right? Because they thought for back then that a sickness was related to your sin. So it's actually that priests would examine the body and they would verify, they would look at them, and then they would be the ones that would verify that, oh, this person is healed. And so if you were an outcast like a leper, right, then you should go and receive, that's what Jesus is saying, go show yourselves to the priest. And so imagine if you were this isolated leper, you were quarantined and you were isolated and you had been living like that for years, but then you receive acceptance back, right? That's what they really desire, is to receive acceptance. Receive acceptance so they can go back into the city walls and they can once again live life, right? Live their free life, right? Live life free like they were before and not quarantined away like this. And so that's what they wanted. That's what they desired, right? And so, this is what lepers wanted. Imagine this is what Samaritans wanted as well too, right? And so being isolated from the people, wanting to be reintegrated back into the nation, there was probably this desire too. We may have that desire too. So we really want to be accepted by people, right? We want other people to really accept it. And so, this is what should happen, right, to the lepers, that being healed of the sickness, but also being accepted back into society. So he tells them to go back to the priest. And so, what is precious about these 10 lepers? Well, they cry out for help, right? They cry out for help. So that's what I want to say first, right? So the first step into being healed is to know that I am sick. I should go ask the doctor for help, right? If I go ask the doctor for help, and then what? Then I should obey the doctor's orders, right? So I go to the doctor, I receive his help, and then I obey the doctor's orders. And we see that this is what they did. So this is the precious part about the lepers, right? They go to they want and they desire that healing, and then when Jesus says, go show yourselves to the priest, and then as they went, they were healed, right? So they follow the doctor's orders, and they follow Jesus' orders, and then they go and they're sick, right? Then they go and they're healed from their sickness, right? And so really, you feel this as I mean, someone comes and he really does Bible study, and he wants to go forward in faith, and he wants to be healed from all the issues of the sickness inside, right? Well, what is the first step? Someone should know that they are a sinner, right? That's the first step. So, to be healed from sickness, we should know that we are a sinner. And then we should ask for help, right? We should ask for help. And so, what happens? So they come and they really want help, right, for their life and then to change their life. Well, you should know, first of all, that you're a sinner, and then what do? I read them the Bible. So that's what the Bible does, right? The Bible tells us, what we should do, and then, that person should obey, right? That's how we should be. We should know we are sick, and then we should obey. And when we know we are sick and we obey like that, then God really gives us healing. That's how it is, right? God gives us healing. And so, that's why these lepers were very, very precious, right? It's because they wanted to be healed and then they obeyed, right? And so, for us in faith, we have to remember that, right? Knowing that we are sick, and then, what the Bible teaches us, having that obedience, right? Having that obedience. But what is that obedience? We should also look at that obedience, right? And so, is God giving the healing as a result of the obedience, right? And so that's not it, right? And so he's not giving the healing as a result of the obedience. If that was, then it would be that, somehow that, when they arrive at the priest, right, and then they would be healed, right, in that way, at that place, right? So it would be, maybe the story would be written like that. But no, if you read this story, it says that they were healed on the way, right? So it's not when they actually arrived at the priest, but it was that they were healed on the way like this. And so what does that mean? It means that it's by faith, right? So it's the heart of the obedience, right? That's what it's talking about here. This is the heart of obedience. So, when we have the heart of obedience, then, we will really receive accordingly. That's what it means by faith. We don't have to do anything in terms of results. It's not that they have to reach the priest, but they have to just have their heart open and have the heart of obedience. It's that, for myself, I cannot heal myself. I cannot, based on the results of my obedience, be healed. This is how, this is legalism. This is how we can be legalistic and too intellectual in our faith. It's that, we have to do something in order to be healed, right? In this way. It's like the result of the obedience for me to be healed. But you come to see that faith is much different, right? Faith is just understanding in the heart that actually I'm a sinner and I cannot heal myself on my own. In fact, I have no recourse and there is no way I can solve my problem. I can solve my sins on my own. But what I do have is that I have a heart of obedience, right? I have the heart to want to obey, to really follow the Bible, right? And so some people, they think when we read the Bible, it's that what the Bible says, you have to obey the Bible perfectly and 100%, and then you will be healed, right? And it's the result of your obedience that actually heals you. But when we come to find out, it's deeper than that, and it's not even that requirement that we have to follow everything, 100% legalistically like that. Really, it's that I actually can't follow whatsoever. I am not perfect, and I cannot follow whatsoever. But my heart is open to God, right? And how is God? God is the one that is already there. He is pouring down grace on us, and He is healing us, right? He's healing us. So, really, it's just a matter of accepting the healing from God, right? And it's on the way, we are healed, like this. This is what it means to be unconditional love. Right? This is what it means to be unconditional love. So unconditional love is not something where by some condition of my obedience that I am healed, but unconditional love means it's just already there, right? It's already there, and I'm just accepting and opening up my heart to what is already there. And so, like these lepers, right? They are the unloved, isolated, sick lepers who are not loved. And so, what happens to lepers? well, what happens to the sickness of leprosy is that the more and more they are isolated, they get desensitized to love. Right? This is what happens. They get desensitized to people. I mean, I think that's what happened during the pandemic, right? During the pandemic, we're all isolated to one another, and then we become even more desensitized to one another, and we start not to feel anything. And even more than the body getting numb and hardened, my heart, right? My heart becomes hardened. And so that's the deep sickness inside of the world, the hearts. That's why we are all one big giant leper colony. It is the heart that is hardened, and we can't open up our hearts to God. Right? And so it's this lack of being able to open up our hearts to God. Right? And so that's what they have. They desire to know that they are sick, that their heart is hard. Right? Now, how can we be healed if we don't even know that we are sick? If we think my heart is okay, right? If we think my heart is not hard and isolated in that way, and we think we're doing okay, I'm doing my best, being warm to other people, and then, that's good enough. But, all we're doing is just, the warmth we're feeling is just like, you shiver a little bit, and then what does shivering do? Shivering causes you to be a little warmer, is what it does, and that's all we're doing, right? We're just shivering ourselves warm but we're still just ultimately cold, living in a very cold world like it, right? More than the shivering warmth that we need in the world, we need fundamental warmth, right? We need fundamental warmth in our hearts. And so, it's our heart, right? That comes from our hearts. But our hearts, which have been desensitized in the world, we don't open up our hearts to God, right? We don't open up our hearts to God. Then all that happens is like the leprosy patch, spreads, here and there and all kinds of things. So, that's how we are. That's why our hearts are hardened inside of the world. But how is God? So how is God? God is the almighty, powerful God, right? And so even if our heart is hard, then still, like we could think, maybe God will just like open up our hearts like that. But, in fact, God, He doesn't force us. He doesn't that's not love, essentially. Like, force us open in love. Like, God loves us. He's always pouring down that love upon us. We simply need to just open up our hearts like that. But that opening up of our hearts, though He is the almighty, powerful God, He doesn't force that open, right? But also, it's not like God abandoned us either. Right? It's not like God abandoned us either. So He doesn't force that heart open to His people, right? To the Jews who were exiled and isolated in that way. He didn't force them in any way, but what did He do instead? He sent His Son. Right? He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, to us. And how is Jesus Christ? Jesus showed us unconditional love with His life. Right? With His life, He bore the cross. That's what we're meditating on towards Easter. With His life, He bore the cross, and He gave us unconditional love. And how is that unconditional love? It's something that doesn't expect anything back. That's how unconditional love is. He just poured down that love on us. It's a very illogical, paradoxical gospel love. In this world where we have legalistic, intellectual relationships with one another, this is the illogical, paradoxical gospel. This is why, really, legalistic, intellectual people, they cannot understand the gospel, right? Because the gospel is illogical and it's paradoxical, right? It's illogical, unconditional, and paradoxical, but then somehow this has much greater power, right? We cannot think about it, but actually this has greater power. With my smarts, I don't know, and I cannot see that it has much greater power, but really it has much greater power. And I felt this, myself coming to church, Like I used to be like that, with my relationships with other people. Like friends expecting things legalistically. I do something for you, and you do something for me, right? And then, someone did something for me, and so, that's what happened when I came to church. Like, I was just used to that. You do something for me, and I do something for you, right? But then I came to church, and then, they were just always doing things for me, right? They were always doing things for me, and then I was very skeptical. I was like, why are these people so nice to me? That's what I thought when I first came to church, right? I totally wasn't used to this, and I was like, why are these people so nice to me? It was almost like, what do they want? Right? What do they want out of me? Like, what are they expecting me to do? Right? And that's how I felt. And then when they were really nice to me and not even expecting something back, and then even if I tried to do something, and then, I just felt like really uncomfortable in that way. And then, because, the gospel, this illogical, paradoxical love is uncomfortable. It really is very uncomfortable. To someone who is like a leper, like if you're sick and living in this world like a leper, and then you receive unconditional love, it's illogical, it's paradoxical love like this, then it's uncomfortable. And that's how I felt at first, like, what do I do? Like, what am I expected to do? But, what happened for me, it was one by one, hearing God's word, and I realized, that's the love of Jesus. It's because they themselves have received the love of Jesus. That's why they're so nice to me, right? It's because they're just simply just like Jesus showed unconditional love to them, right? They want to show unconditional love to me as well too. And that's all it is. Not expecting anything back from me, but because they have received unconditional love from Jesus Christ, they have an unconditional loving relationship with God, showing that to me. And then, that realization comes deeply inside of your heart. And then it burns inside of your heart. And you realize, this is how I must show love to others as well too, just unconditionally. Illogically and paradoxically. Right? This is how. And I really, really want to find this. And then, finally, let's look at Luke chapter 17, in verse 15 through 19. Luke chapter 17, verse 15 through 19. It says, one of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet, thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to him, rise and go, your faith has made you well. So, on the road, 10 were healed, right? But then, only one came back to Jesus, praising God, and was filled with thankfulness, right, to Jesus, coming down at his feet, thanking him. He was overflowing in thanks like this, right? So, clearly, this is what I want to say about this scene. So here, clearly, 10 people, right? 10 people were made physically well from their leprosy, right? They had that heart to really desire to be healed, and then having the heart to obey like that, and then they were made well. But only one was made well beyond the physical, right? So 10 were made well physically from their leprosy, but only one, right, was made well beyond the physical, right? Beyond the physical. So what do we want to say about this? About the 9 people, right? So regarding the 9 out of the 10 people who were healed physically, right? I'm sure they were thankful. Right? I'm sure they were thankful. Right? This is what we're talking about. Only one came back to thank Jesus. Well, I'm sure that the 9 out of the 10, right, were thankful. And so maybe, thinking on the way, they're like, I'm healed, this is great, and I need to be back to society, I need to get back to society, to the priest, and so on and so forth. And for them, it's like a token thanks. Thanks, I appreciate it, thanks, right? Then they go back to the priest, and then they're on their way back into their life again, right? Going back to society and back into life again, and that's how it works, right? And so, these other 9, the title of today's message is, where are the other 9? In other words, who are these other 9, and where are they going, and what are they doing, right? Where are they going, and who are they, and what are they doing, right? And so, this 9 out of 10, right, is the many, many crowds of people that come to church, right? The 9/10 of people that I meet, right? The 9/10 of the people that I meet, right? And so how is it with 9/10 of the people that I meet? It's like this kind of atmosphere. They come in to church and they hear some nice words, these nice Bible study words. Right? There's some people that actually come in like that. They just want to come in because they want to hear some nice words. It feels so nice, like hearing these words, right? And so, hearing nice Bible study words like this, right? And so how are these people when it comes to hearing these nice Bible study words? Well, they say thanks, right? They say thanks. And that's how it is. They say thanks. So they say thanks and thank you, right? It's a very legalistic thanks in that way. It's a very acknowledgement thanks in this way. And so this is how 9/10 of the people are. So many people, 9/10 of the people say thanks, but only 1/10 really have thanksgiving. Only 1/10 really truly have thanksgiving. You really come to find this in this sick leprosy world that we live in. Only one man had this overflowing heart of thanksgiving, right, is what I want to say. Look at this. I'm sure that the other 9/10, they had thanks, right? They were thankful, right? They were thankful. Right? Oh, I'm healed. I can get back to society. Well, who would not be thankful? They're thankful, right? They're thankful, right? But only one came back at Jesus' feet, really, pouring out his heart. It's so very warm, how it is towards Jesus, and he's just overflowing in true thanksgiving inside of the heart, right? And then what did Jesus say? He says, "Your faith has made you well." So we know that he had faith, right? Your faith has made you well again. So how are the other 9? They know that they are sick and they obey and they have the heart of obedience. So they their heart is open up in that way. But we see it's like this limited type opening, right? It's this limited type opening. As lepers, probably they want to get back into society, get back to life again, and just be healed and be like a normal person in society. I mean, some people actually, they come to Bible study like that. Like, come teach me Bible study so that I can be like a normal person in society. That's like why they want to come. Like, they feel like I'm abnormal, and then they just want to be like anyone else, like a normal person inside of society. And so these lepers, they want to get back to society, so they're thankful insofar as they have normal relationships with other people. Right? So they have, in other words, what we call human thankfulness, right? So they are back into a place where human to human, back into society, and they have human thankfulness. Because you did something for them, they are thankful to you, and so they're thankful insofar as this legalistic thankfulness, right? And so it's this legalistic person-to-person thankfulness, which is very limited. It's very limited gratitude. And so I do something for me, thank you, and then you do something back to me, thank you, right? And it's just like that. It's very, very limited according to human power. Now, of course, right, so if I want to talk about this legalistic human thankfulness, so this acknowledgement type, humanistic, legalistic thankfulness, it's a morally decent thing. So no one's saying that it's a bad thing. It's a morally decent thing to do. Right? So someone does something for you, right? So you say thank you. And it's a very morally decent thing to do to say thank you. And then to want to repay that back, it's a morally decent thing to do to want to pay back what they did to you, right? And so it's a very morally decent thing to do. But what I want to say is that thanksgiving, right? This overflowing heart of thanksgiving that this 1/10 person had is something much beyond deep, right? That's what it is, right? And so, how can I give an example? So, if you have an acquaintance, right? If you have an acquaintance does something for you, right? Then they do something nice for you, you give them thanks, you probably do something nice back to them. That's how you treat someone who is an acquaintance, right? But how is family? Right? How's family? So when you're in family, what happens is that you are in a state of thanksgiving all the time. That's what a family is. A family is in a state of thanksgiving, being in thanksgiving all the time. It's not like someone does something for you and you something does. It's not like that, right? It's not calculative. It doesn't think like that. It's just being. It's just in this state of thanksgiving all the time. And so that's why it's just overflowing all the time with thanksgiving. It never ends. It just keeps going, and no one's calculating, no one's thinking in this way. It's just all the time. It's being in thanksgiving all the time. That's how a true family has, right? And so that's what I want to say. I'm using that example to help us understand what a true loving relationship is, being in unconditional love. Being in a true relationship in an unconditional love, having that thanksgiving, this being in thanksgiving with God all the time, it reveals more than just thanks, right? It reveals more than just simple gratitude. And so, how can I have this very much deeper heart of being in this state of thanksgiving with God? It's not possible simply with just human thanks, right? Thinking about what God has done for me and then just like wanting to give back, according to that. But it's just being. It's just being. It's like much simpler than that, but it's also much deeper at the same time. That's why it's so paradoxical. Like, it seems much simpler, right? Like, it's much more like, intellectually makes sense if like what God has done for me, then I repay him back accordingly. That makes much more logical sense. It seems stronger, but it's actually more shallow. This is why the paradoxical gospel is so paradoxical. Because it's much more simple just being in it, but it's a much deeper relationship, just like family is. Right? And so these 9/10 people, they just had incremental healing. They just had healing accordingly to the physical healing, and it was just incremental healing, and it was just accordingly to the openness that they had accordingly to it. But the 1/10 was just truly transformed, right? Being in an open, loving, unconditional relationship with God all the time. That's what faith is, right? This is what true faith is, right? Faith is not that legalism faith, but it is this faith of just being in with God all the time, right? And so, it says here that he was actually a Samaritan, right? He was a Samaritan. So maybe he was an outsider. Maybe he felt isolated in society all the time. Maybe at the same time he felt isolated from God in that way. But in conclusion, the other people were transformed physically, right? But he was transformed both physically and spiritually, right? Through his relationship with Jesus. Really, it's true. It's only through a relationship with Jesus we can have a relationship with God. So let us ask ourselves today, do we want this kind of transformation in our life? Some people come to church and they just want a nice time, right? They come to church and they just want a nice time. And so maybe you might just get temporary human rewards like that. You'll get thanks. You'll get thanks out of that. You'll get some temporary things out of that. And that's how it is. But I wish we could have thanksgiving. So truly having a heart of love. Like, don't we want to experience that? We want to experience a true heart of love, being a fruit of true faith, my life transformed by God who is above, and Jesus Christ in my life. Let's have a warm relationship with God that comes from this unconditional love and have true thanksgiving. Even though we were lepers, Jesus came to us. He bore his precious cross of blood for us. We're walking the 40 days now towards that, meditating on that. He healed us from our sickness. This is the illogical, paradoxical love that the world does not understand. But I hope that we can receive this unconditional love of Jesus from the cross, and then we can show this to the world. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you, Lord. As we look at these 10 lepers who were healed, we come to find how we were in this world, Lord. We are the legalistic ones, Lord. We are just going accordingly with a cold heart. But instead, Lord, we come to find we're just living in one big giant leper colony in this world, Lord, with cold and hardened hearts. Lord, help open wide our hearts. You helped us open wide your hearts through your Son, Jesus Christ. May we be the ones that, as we open wide our hearts to Jesus in this way, we become this one out of 10 people, Lord, who really unconditionally open up our hearts, just being in a state of love with you all the time, because that is how you are pouring down your love on us. We thank you so much, Lord, for allowing us this, and Lord, the unconditional love we have received, may we share this unconditional